I'm sure you've all seen by now Nvidia's announcement of Ada Lovelace or the RTX 4000. You've seen the RTX 4090, the 4080, and the 4070. I guess that's the running joke, or I mean the 4080 12GB. I'm sorry, Nvidia. 4080 16 gigabyte, 4080 12 gigabyte. Okay, I got it. No 4070 yet. Anyway, you guys have seen those GPUs announced, and you're probably wondering, what do you do? Because you've also seen those prices. I'm going to give you guys my feedback and opinion, what I plan to do, and what I think you guys should do as well. First, this means that RTX 3000 is still here. I mean, Nvidia even posted their sort of product snapshot. Usually with a new generation, don't you think they would want to forget the previous generation? That's old stuff. Nobody wants to deal with anymore. Often it's conflicting sets of technologies, like DLSS 3.0 is going to work on RTX 4000, maybe not so much on RTX 3000. Generally, you would want to just forget the previous generation, but because of supply chain issues and inventory issues and the crypto crash and gamers buying less, all of those problems, Nvidia has a lot of RTX 3000, so they decided to keep it in place and therefore not release a 4070 because that would be way too cheap and competitive to go up against existing RTX 3000. So that's why they made this really funny RTX 4080 12GB. First, let's get the easy one out of the way. That's the RTX 4090. Comes in at $1599 for the Founders Edition, and remember, AIB pricing, like from Asus, not from EVGA, as you know, they're completely out, but Asus, MSI, Zotac, those you can expect to be considerably more. I mean, an RTX 3090 had a Founders Edition $1499 price when it came out, but the Asus Strix was as much as $2299. So who knows how far up the AIBs will go. I don't think as high as before because now the demand isn't nearly as much, but you can certainly expect the 4090 to be much more expensive than any other GPU. The base, $1599, that's what you expect. Is it a good GPU for that price? Well, certainly it's pretty expensive, but we're not going to get away from these very expensive prices, especially not now. I think it's an impressive GPU in terms of the technology in it. According to Nvidia, 2 to 4 times the ray tracing performance, and even in games like Flight Simulator, I'm sure a lot of people will be happy to get more performance in a game like that. That's some of the comments I've gotten in the past. A very difficult game to run. I play it myself. Certainly a lot of fun. Now, traditional rasterization, maybe it might be closer to twice a 3090. That's what I meant, 2 to 4 times the 3090. Now, we don't know if that's going to happen in every case. You can see when Nvidia does their little testing, they even say DLSS 3.0 performance mode. It's certain games that are well optimized. So in general, I don't think we're going to get those numbers, but overall, the 4090 is definitely a very potent GPU. And for the high-end gamer, I think it's going to be probably a pretty good buy. That's going to last you a very long time, well into the next generation. Doesn't mean that the 3090 Ti or 3090 are outdated by any means. They're still very, very capable GPUs, but certainly the 4090 has its own price point of $1599, very distinct from the others. So I think that's really going to be an easy one. If you have the money to get it and you want to upgrade, easy to go ahead, especially considering people were used to paying inflated prices for like 3080 Ti's at that price or more during the last year. I don't think most people that were going to buy that GPU anyway and have a budget for over $1,500, they'll probably be fine buying this one, and it's going to be very, very good. We'll see what happens with AMD's RDNA 3. They should have something pretty competitive. That's the only thing you may want to wait for, but otherwise, if you're the person to buy that type of GPU, that's pretty easy. And now let's hear a word from our sponsor. Priced pretty good is a Windows CD key. Today's video sponsor is going to be VIP-CDKdeals.com. Very simple process. You can get a Windows 10 Pro CD key and remember to use code CC20 for a nice discount. And now back to the video. It gets pretty hard though when we start talking about the two RTX 4080s at $1199 and $899 respectively. This is a bit surprising, but it's also not surprising. Why is it not surprising? Well, Nvidia has done a dual 3080 strategy before, or 80 series GPU. Look at last generation RTX 3000. You had the 12 gigabyte come out at around $1299, $1,200 compared to the original 10 gigabyte 3080 at $699. So they had these dual GPUs before, a low-end 3080 and a high-end 3080, if you will, with the price to reflect that. Now here, instead of staggering that launch out over a year or so, they've launched both at the same time, and there's no 4070 that we've seen. It makes a lot of sense, actually. People would be shocked if a 4070 did go all the way up to $899. Once again, $499 was its original MSRP. So definitely makes a lot of sense that Nvidia calls it a 4080, even if it's a 12 gigabyte 4080. So we're going to have to see how that GPU performs when we see different games compared to the 4080 16 gigabyte, but it's not the same GPU at all. Many less CUDA cores. The performance is going to be on an entirely different level than the 16 gigabyte 4080. And if you're already going to spend $1,200 on an RTX 4080 16 gigabyte, who's to say you don't go up a little more and do the 4090, which has even more VRAM and is going to be even more powerful. So definitely kind of tricky to choose the high-end GPUs. If you have that extra bit of money, just go for the 4090 so you don't have to worry about these performance differences. But for most of us that want to consider the budget and get the best performance for the dollar, I'm not too sure you're going to find that performance for the dollar in this sort of 4080 range. You may have to wait for the 4070 eventually when the RTX 3000 inventory has been crushed down. That may be the only time that the 4080 may make sense or go down in price. Another huge point here, the RTX 4080 12 gigabyte, according to some of the reports we've seen, will not have a Founders Edition. That's significant because the Founders Edition typically will have the cheapest MSRP. That means that an $899 3080 12 gigabyte on paper may be realistic, a base model, doesn't mean they're ever physically going to have to sell it to you. You're going to see this GPU for well over that price, probably over $1,000, getting much closer to the Founders Edition price of the 16 gigabyte 3080, making that in many cases likely a better buy when the price differential shrinks down a significant amount. Now the 3080 16 gigabyte and the 4090, of course, we do expect to see in the cheaper base model MSRP, and the Founders Edition provides that. So we're going to have to see what realistically happens with this 4080 12 gigabyte, but I have a feeling it's kind of thrown in there just so the prices that AIBs get to play with are going to be moved around a considerable amount. After all, that's what happened with the 3080 12 gigabyte. It never had a Founders Edition version, so Nvidia never had to publicly say that they raised the price of the 3080. So that's an interesting move, and it's obvious Nvidia likes to push a lot of this bad type of behavior onto the AIBs, much like what EVGA complained about, so that way they take most of the brunt and most of the complaint, and Nvidia gets out kind of squeaky clean with their image, or at least not having to publicly raise prices on Founder Edition GPUs. So the question is, if you have a fairly high-end RTX 3000 GPU and you've been waiting for RTX 4000, but you don't want to necessarily spend the big bucks for the 4090, I don't blame you, very expensive GPU. What do you do at this point? I mean, if it's a 3090 Ti that you have, it's going to be a little tricky. Is that really going to be worse than a 4080 12 gigabyte? I mean, half the VRAM in the 4080, so we're going to have to see the actual benchmarks and if DLSS 3.0 is really that good on this particular GPU compared to the 3090 Ti. Without the independent reviews, which should be coming in the next several weeks, we don't really know where the 3090 Ti, the last, best GPU, is going to fall in comparison to these GPUs. We know the price is falling. We already saw as cheap as $999 before the RTX 4000 launch. I'm sure when the RTX 4000 is actually released, we may see even heavier discounted 3090 Ti's. So we don't know if that's going to be a good deal or not compared to the 4080 12 gigabyte, depending how easily you can find a 4080 12 gigabyte, and if that AIB price is really inflated, and how good the technology like DLSS 3.0 and the things that are new are really going to perform. So definitely very tricky. But if you have anything else below a 3090 Ti, what do you do? I don't think the 3080 12 gigabyte is a good buy at all. That should be a 4070, and that's just way too expensive. I think your only option here, if you don't want to go for a 4090 but you want a next generation GPU, is to perhaps stretch it to the 4080 16 gigabyte version. At least then, yes, you are going to have to pay $1199 for an RTX 4080, but at least you're getting the full potent GPU, the best that an RTX 4080 likely can be until a Ti comes out later on. So 16 gigabytes of VRAM, you're going to get many more CUDA cores than the RTX 4080 12 gigabyte, and you do save a little bit of money, around $400 if we're talking about base MSRP compared to the 4090, and it should perform more than well enough in all of the newest games, have the newest technology, technologies, and you're not going to have a limited 4080 like the 12 gigabyte. If that 12 gigabyte 4080 was cheaper than $899, maybe the $699 original price of the original 3080, then you can make a lot more of an argument, especially if it came out as a Founders Edition and that's really the MSRP. You can make a much more solid argument then. But at $899, no Founders Edition, with the possibility that AIBs, or 100% possibility, I should say, that AIBs are going to crank that price up over $1,000, that makes the RTX 4080 16 gigabyte the most logical price to performance in the group of three here that you can buy. Not saying that this is the best price to performance you're going to find. They're still way too expensive. We all know that. But given the facts that we see on the table here, that's what I would do if you want a high-end GPU, but you want to save a little bit of money and not compromise with a cheaper GPU. As expensive as it is, taken with the new generation and considering we're not going to see a 4070 probably for at least a few months or a fairly long time, it seems to be a more reasonable choice amongst the three. Sort of, powerful enough, not limited enough, and the pricing, while high, is not as high as the 4090. So that would be my pick as the best price to performance, most likely, without really seeing solid numbers aside from what we got from Nvidia. But of course, the real reviews with real games are going to tell us the entire story, and then we'll be able to make a much better decision. But without a doubt, the 4080 at 12 gigabyte, not a good deal at all. Not very happy with that price, and I don't think many people will be either. All right, guys, so let me know what you think down below. Remember to subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next video.